Hello and welcome to Insomniac Histories. Imagine standing in the rolling hills of central Italy, long before the word Roman meant anything at all. Before the legions, before the Caesars, before the empire that would conquer the known world, there was another people here. They built magnificent cities with paved streets and sophisticated drainage systems. They created art of breathtaking beauty. They gave the world the arch, the vault, and the foundations of what would become Roman civilization itself. And then, mysteriously, they vanished. Their language was forgotten. Their cities were buried. Their very existence was nearly erased from history. These were the Etruscans, and their story is one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. Tonight, we will uncover the secrets of this extraordinary civilization. We will walk through their painted tombs, decipher their enigmatic language, and explore how they shaped the destiny of Rome and all of Western civilization. This is a story of a people who were once mighty, sophisticated, and powerful, but who left behind more questions than answers. But before we begin our exploration, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It's a simple and wonderful way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me tonight. So I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. And now, settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away, and let us travel back to a time of mysterious rituals, magnificent cities, and a civilization that history almost forgot. Our story begins with a question that has puzzled historians for over 2,000 years. Who were the Etruscans? Where did they come from? The ancient writers themselves could not agree. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BC, claimed that the Etruscans originally came from Lydia in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. He told a story of a great famine that forced half the Lydian population to leave their homeland. Led by a prince named Tyrrhenus, they sailed across the Mediterranean and settled in Italy. This would explain why the Greeks called the Etruscans the Tyrrhenians, and why the sea west of Italy is still called the Tyrrhenian Sea today. But another ancient historian, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, writing in the 1st century BC, strongly disagreed. He argued that the Etruscans were indigenous to Italy, that they had always been there. He pointed to their unique language and customs as evidence that they were not related to any other known people. This debate has continued into modern times. For centuries, scholars argued passionately for one theory or the other. Were the Etruscans immigrants from the East, or were they native Italians? In recent decades, modern science has begun to provide some answers. Archaeological evidence, linguistic studies, and most recently, DNA analysis have started to piece together a more complex picture. The current consensus suggests that the Etruscans were primarily indigenous to the Italian peninsula, descendants of the prehistoric Villanovan culture that inhabited the region during the early Iron Age. However, there may have been some cultural and genetic influence from Eastern Mediterranean populations, perhaps through trade and limited migration. The truth, as is often the case, appears to be somewhere in the middle. The Etruscans emerged around the 8th century BC in the region the Romans would later call Etruria. This was the area of central Italy roughly corresponding to modern-day Tuscany, Umbria, and northern Lazio. The word Tuscany itself derives from Tusci, the Latin name for the Etruscans. The landscape was perfect for the development of a sophisticated civilization. It had fertile valleys watered by rivers like the Arno and the Tiber. It had mineral-rich hills containing copper, iron, and tin, the essential ingredients for making bronze. And it had access to the sea, allowing for trade with the broader Mediterranean world. The Etruscans called themselves the Rasenna, or Rasna. We know this from inscriptions in their own language, but to the Romans, they were the Etrusi or Tusi, and to the Greeks, they were the Tyrannoi. They never formed a single unified empire. Instead, Etruria was organized as a loose confederation of independent city-states. There were 12 major cities in the heartland, forming what was known as the Dodecapolis, or 12 cities. These included Veii, Tarquinia, Caere, Vulci, Vetulonia, and Volsini, among others. Each city was independent, ruled by its own king or later by elected magistrates. They had their own territories, their own armies, and their own policies. But they shared a common language, religion, and culture. They would gather once a year at the Fanum Voltumnae, a sacred sanctuary, for religious ceremonies and to discuss matters of common interest. However, this loose confederation was both a strength and a fatal weakness. It allowed for cultural flourishing and local autonomy, but it meant the Etruscans could never unite effectively against external threats. When Rome began its expansion, the Etruscan cities often fought alone, and they fell one by one. Let us step back in time and imagine what it would be like to visit an Etruscan city at the height of their power, around the 6th century BC. You approach the city of Tarquinia, one of the greatest and most powerful of the Etruscan cities. The first thing that strikes you is the city's position. It sits atop a high plateau, a natural fortress overlooking the surrounding countryside and the distant sea. As you climb the road toward the city gates, you notice the massive stone walls, constructed from enormous blocks fitted together with impressive precision. These are not crude fortifications. They are sophisticated defensive works that speak of wealth, organization, and engineering skill. You pass through the gate, and suddenly you are in a world that would seem remarkably advanced. Compared to most other places in Italy at this time, the streets are paved, not with simple dirt or gravel, but with carefully cut stone blocks. Many streets have raised sidewalks. Most remarkably, you notice stone channels running along the sides of the streets. These are part of an elaborate drainage system, designed to carry rainwater and waste out of the city. This level of urban planning will not be seen again in Italy until the Romans adopt and expand upon these Etruscan techniques. The houses of the wealthy are substantial structures, often 2 stories tall, built of stone or mud brick and covered with brightly painted stucco. The roofs are covered with terracotta tiles, often decorated with elaborate antefixes, ornamental pieces that cover the ends of the roof tiles. Many of these decorations are shaped like the heads of gods, demons, or mythical creatures, painted in vivid colors. The effect is both beautiful and slightly unsettling, as hundreds of eyes seem to watch you from the rooftops. At the center of the city is the forum, the marketplace and public gathering place. Here, the city's residents buy and sell goods, discuss politics, and conduct business. The forum is surrounded by public buildings, temples, administrative halls, and porticos where people can shelter from the rain or sun. The temples are particularly impressive. They sit on high stone platforms, approached by broad stone steps. The structure is built of wood and mud brick, but the exterior is covered with brilliantly colored terracotta decorations. The roof is crowned with life-size terracotta statues of gods and heroes. Unlike the austere marble temples of later Greece and Rome, these Etruscan temples are riots of color: red, black, white, and ochre. They are meant to impress, to inspire awe, and to demonstrate the city's devotion to the gods. Inside the temple, the walls are decorated with frescoes, and the sacred space is divided into three chambers, dedicated to a triad of deities. The Etruscans worship many gods, some of their own and some borrowed and adapted from the Greeks. Their supreme deity is Tinia, similar to the Greek Zeus and the Roman Jupiter. His wife is Uni, comparable to Greek Hera and Roman Juno. There is Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, like Greek Athena and Roman Minerva. As you walk through the city, you notice something else unusual for the ancient world. Women are everywhere, and they are not hidden away or secluded as they are in many Greek cities. Etruscan women are visible, active participants in public life. You see them at the market buying goods and conducting business. You see them attending public games and religious ceremonies, seated beside their husbands. This is scandalous to Greek observers. The Greek historians write with shock and disapproval about Etruscan women. They note that Etruscan women dine with their husbands, reclining at banquets, drinking wine, and participating in conversation. In the Greek world, respectable women would never do such things. The Greeks interpret this freedom as evidence of moral looseness, but they are simply observing a different culture with different values. The evidence from Etruscan art and tomb inscriptions confirms this. Etruscan women had their own names, not just their father's or husband's name. They could own property. They could inherit wealth. On tomb inscriptions, a person's lineage is often traced through both the mother and the father, something extremely rare in the ancient world. The Romans, who would later conquer the Etruscans, were both fascinated and disturbed by this. They adopted many Etruscan customs, but they never fully embraced the Etruscan attitude toward women. As you explore the city, you come to the homes of the elite. Let us imagine you are invited to dine at the house of a wealthy Etruscan merchant. You enter through a central doorway into an atrium, an open courtyard. The house is built around this central space, with rooms opening off it. The floor is paved with stone or decorated with simple mosaics. The walls are painted with colorful frescoes depicting mythological scenes, banquets, or athletic competitions. As evening approaches, you are led into the dining room. Here, you recline on cushioned couches arranged around the walls. Your host and his wife recline together on the same couch, something that would never happen in a Greek household. Servants, likely slaves, bring course after course of food. The Etruscans are known for their love of banqueting, and this meal does not disappoint. There is bread made from wheat, a luxury in a world where many people eat only barley. There are fish from the nearby sea and rivers, grilled and seasoned with herbs. There is pork, a favorite meat of the Etruscans, roasted and served with a sauce made from wine and honey. There are olives, figs, and grapes. And there is wine, lots of wine, mixed with water in the Greek fashion, and served in beautiful pottery cups. As you eat, musicians play. A young man plays a double flute, a distinctive instrument called the aulos, while another plays a lyre. The music is lively, rhythmic, and unlike anything you have heard before. After the meal, dancers enter, performing acrobatic leaps and twirls. This is entertainment, but it is also ritual. Music, dance, and feasting are all part of Etruscan religious and social life. The evening ends late, and you leave the house feeling that you have experienced something unique. A civilization that combines sophistication, pleasure, and a deep connection to the divine. But to truly understand the Etruscans, we must leave the world of the living and descend to the realm of the dead. For it is in their tombs, their great necropolises, that the Etruscans reveal their deepest beliefs, their greatest artistry, and their most enduring legacy. The Etruscans had an intense and complex relationship with death and the afterlife. They believed that the dead continued to exist in another realm, and that this realm was, in many ways, a continuation of earthly life. Therefore, the dead needed to be provided with everything they would need: food, drink, furniture, weapons, and jewelry. The tombs of the wealthy Etruscans are not simple graves. They are houses for the dead, elaborate underground chambers carved into the soft volcanic rock called tufa, or built as massive tumuli, circular mounds of earth covering stone burial chambers. Let us visit the necropolis of Tarquinia, one of the most spectacular archaeological sites in Italy. You walk through a field dotted with dozens of grassy mounds. Beneath each mound is a tomb, and many of these tombs are decorated with frescoes, paintings that have survived for over 2,000 years. You descend a modern staircase into one of the tombs, the Tomb of the Leopards, dated to around 480 BC. As your eyes adjust to the dim light, you gasp. The walls are covered with vivid paintings. The ceiling is painted to look like a tent, with colourful stripes radiating from a central point. On the walls, you see a banquet scene. Men and women recline on couches holding cups of wine. Servants move among them, carrying jugs and dishes. Musicians play flutes and lyres. The figures are painted in profile, in a style reminiscent of Egyptian art, but with a liveliness and joy that is distinctly Etruscan. The colours are still bright: red, black, white, ochre, and blue. The scene is one of celebration, of life, not of mourning. You move to another tomb, the Tomb of the Triclinium. Here the walls depict dancers, young men and women leaping and twirling with extraordinary grace. Their movements are captured with such skill that you can almost see them moving, almost hear the music. There are also scenes of hunting and fishing, of athletes competing, of everyday life. These are not solemn memorials. They are celebrations of the pleasures of existence, a defiant statement that life, even in death, continues. In another tomb, the Tomb of the Augurs, you see something different. Here, alongside scenes of games and athletics, there are religious rituals. Priests perform divination, interpreting the will of the gods. There are images of demons and spirits, reminders that the afterlife also holds dangers and mysteries. The Etruscans believed in a complex underworld ruled by gods and populated by demons. There was Ater, the god of the underworld, equivalent to the Greek Hades. There was his wife, Persephone, like the Greek Persephone, and there were terrifying demons like Cherun, a figure with a hammer who guided souls to the underworld, and Vanth, a female demon with wings. These figures appear in tomb paintings, often presiding over the deceased, reminding them of the power and mystery of death. The tombs also contain grave goods, objects buried with the dead. Pottery, bronze vessels, jewelry, weapons, mirrors, and even furniture have been found. These objects provide invaluable information about Etruscan daily life, craftsmanship, and trade. Many of the finest pieces are imports from Greece, evidence of the extensive trade networks that connected Etruria to the wider Mediterranean world. One of the most distinctive types of Etruscan art found in tombs is the sarcophagus. These are stone or terracotta coffins, and the lids are often sculpted with life-sized reclining figures of the deceased. The most famous example is the sarcophagus of the spouses from Cairo, now in the Villa Giulia Museum in Rome. It shows a husband and wife reclining together on a dining couch, as if at an eternal banquet. They are smiling, their gestures affectionate and natural. The wife rests her hand on her husband's shoulder. It is a portrait of a loving partnership, a celebration of marriage that extends beyond death. This is Etruscan art at its finest, intimate, human, and deeply moving. But the tombs hold another secret, one that has frustrated scholars for centuries. They are covered with inscriptions written in the Etruscan language, and despite intensive study, the Etruscan language remains only partially understood. This is one of the great mysteries of the ancient world. The Etruscan language is written in an alphabet derived from Greek, so we can read the letters. But the language itself is unlike any other known language. It is not Indo-European. The family that includes Greek, Latin, and most European languages. It appears to be a language isolate, related to no other known tongue. We have about 13,000 surviving Etruscan inscriptions, but most are very short, often just names and titles on tombs. We can read them phonetically, but we can only understand a fraction of what they say. We know some basic vocabulary. We can identify names, numbers, family relationships, and some religious terms. We can recognize phrases like lived X years, or son of, or dedicated to. But longer texts remain largely opaque. The most frustrating aspect is that we have no bilingual text, no Etruscan Rosetta Stone. If we had a substantial text in both Etruscan and a language we understand, we could crack the code. But such a text has never been found. There is one intriguing artifact, the Pyrgi tablets, found at the port of Caire. These are 3 gold tablets, 2 in Etruscan and 1 in Phoenician, dating to around 500 BC. They describe the dedication of a temple, and they have helped scholars understand some Etruscan religious vocabulary. But the texts are not exact translations, so they provide only limited help. The longest Etruscan text we have is even more mysterious. It is called the Liber Linteus, the Linen Book. It is a linen cloth covered with Etruscan writing, and it survives only because it was reused. In the 19th century, it was discovered in Egypt, where it had been cut into strips and used to wrap a mummy. The cloth contains over 1,200 words of Etruscan text, by far the longest we have. Scholars believe it is a religious calendar describing rituals and ceremonies for different days. But even with this substantial text, much of the meaning remains unclear. The language stubbornly refuses to give up all its secrets. This linguistic isolation has contributed to the air of mystery that surrounds the Etruscans. We can see their art, walk through their cities, and enter their tombs, but we cannot fully hear their voices. We are like visitors to a magnificent house whose owners have left, leaving behind beautiful objects but no explanation of who they were or what they believed. Yet despite this linguistic barrier, we can still learn much about the Etruscans from their material culture and from the accounts of their Greek and Roman neighbors. The Etruscans were master craftsmen, particularly in metalwork. The mineral wealth of Etruria, especially the iron mines on the island of Elba, provided the raw materials for a thriving metallurgical industry. Etruscan bronze work was renowned throughout the Mediterranean. They created elaborate bronze vessels, mirrors, armor, and statues. They mastered techniques like granulation and filigree in goldsmithing, creating jewelry of extraordinary delicacy. One of their most impressive achievements was bronze sculpture. The famous Capitoline wolf, the statue of a she-wolf that has become a symbol of Rome, was created by Etruscan artists. Though the figures of Romulus and Remus suckling beneath her were added much later during the Renaissance. Another masterpiece is the Chimera of Arezzo, a fantastic creature with the body of a lion, a goat's head emerging from its back, and a serpent for a tail. It was found in the 16th century, and it is a testament to the Etruscan skill in casting and working bronze. The Etruscans were also pioneers in engineering and architecture. They were among the first in Italy to use the arch, a curved structure that can span a space and bear weight more effectively than simple post and lintel construction. The arch would become one of the defining features of Roman architecture, but it was the Etruscans who introduced it to Italy. They also developed sophisticated hydraulic engineering. The land of Etruria was often marshy and prone to flooding. The Etruscans built elaborate drainage systems to reclaim land and protect their cities. They carved tunnels through hills to divert water, built bridges, and created underground aqueducts. The Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer of Rome, was originally an Etruscan drainage project designed to drain the marshy valley that would become the Roman Forum. The Romans would later expand and improve it, but the original concept and engineering were Etruscan. Perhaps the most important contribution of the Etruscans to Western civilization was their influence on Rome itself. In the early years, Rome was not the dominant power. It was a small city on the Tiber, one settlement among many, and for much of its early history, it was ruled by Etruscan kings. According to Roman tradition, Rome was founded in 753 BC. The city was initially ruled by kings, and the last three kings of Rome were Etruscans from the city of Tarquinia. Their names were Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud. These Etruscan kings transformed Rome from a collection of primitive villages into a proper city. They drained the marshy valley between the hills and created the Forum, the political and commercial heart of Rome. They built the first great temple on the Capitoline Hill, dedicated to the triad of Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, a direct borrowing from Etruscan religious practice. They introduced Etruscan customs, religious rituals, and political institutions. The Roman practice of augury, divining the will of the gods by observing the flight of birds or examining the entrails of sacrificed animals, came directly from the Etruscans. The Romans even imported Etruscan priests, called haruspices, to teach them these sacred techniques. The fasces, the bundle of rods with an axe bound in the center that became a symbol of Roman authority, was originally an Etruscan symbol. The purple-bordered toga worn by Roman magistrates was an Etruscan garment. The triumphal procession, where a victorious general paraded through the city dressed as Jupiter, riding in a chariot, came from Etruscan tradition. Even the very word Rome may be Etruscan in origin, derived from an Etruscan family name, Ruma. But the relationship between Rome and the Etruscans was not always harmonious. According to Roman legend, the last Etruscan king, Tarquinius Superbus, was a tyrant. His son's rape of a noblewoman named Lucretia sparked a revolt. In 509 BC, the Romans overthrew their king and established the Republic, vowing never again to be ruled by a monarch. Whether this story is historically accurate is debatable. It has clearly been shaped by later Roman propaganda, but it marks the beginning of the end of Etruscan dominance over Rome. The Romans did not immediately turn hostile to all Etruscans. For many years, Rome maintained alliances with some Etruscan cities, but gradually, over the course of the next few centuries, Rome grew stronger while the Etruscan cities remained divided. One by one, the Etruscan cities fell to Roman conquest. Veii, Rome's nearest Etruscan neighbor and longtime rival, was conquered in 396 BC after a 10-year siege. The Romans destroyed the city and sold its population into slavery. This was a turning point, a clear signal that Rome was now the dominant power in central Italy. Other Etruscan cities followed. Some resisted and were destroyed. Others made alliances with Rome, becoming subordinate allies. By the 3rd century BC, all of Etruria was under Roman control. The Etruscan cities lost their independence, but they were not entirely destroyed. They became Roman municipalities. Their aristocracies were gradually absorbed into the Roman elite. Etruscan families became Roman families. The Etruscans were granted Roman citizenship in stages. And by the 1st century BC, the distinction between Etruscan and Roman had largely disappeared. The Etruscan language continued to be spoken in some areas for a time, but Latin gradually replaced it. By the time of the Roman Emperor Augustus in the 1st century BC, Etruscan was a dying language, remembered only by scholars and priests. The last person known to have written a scholarly work on the Etruscan language was the Emperor Claudius in the 1st century AD. He wrote a multi-volume history of the Etruscans in Greek, but sadly, this work has not survived. After Claudius, knowledge of the Etruscan language died out completely. The cities of Etruria continued to exist under Roman rule, but their distinctive culture faded. Their tombs were robbed. Their temples fell into ruin. Their language was forgotten. By the Middle Ages, the Etruscans had become a legend, a mysterious people remembered only in fragments. It was not until the Renaissance that interest in the Etruscans was revived. Scholars and artists began to explore the ancient ruins of Tuscany. They rediscovered the painted tombs, the bronze sculptures, and the inscriptions. But without the ability to read the language, the Etruscans remained enigmatic. In the 18th and 19th centuries, archaeology became a more systematic discipline, and Etruscan sites were excavated scientifically. The great necropolises were explored, and thousands of artifacts were recovered. Museums in Italy and around the world began to fill with Etruscan art. Today, the study of the Etruscans, known as Etruscology, is a vibrant field. New discoveries are still being made. In recent decades, advanced technology has allowed archaeologists to discover entire new tomb complexes without excavation, using ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing techniques. DNA studies are revealing new information about Etruscan origins and their relationship to other ancient populations. Computer analysis is helping linguists make progress in understanding the Etruscan language. But despite all this progress, the Etruscans retain their mystery. There is so much we still do not know. We do not fully understand their political system, their social structures, or their deepest religious beliefs. We cannot read their literature because none has survived. Yet what we do know is remarkable. The Etruscans were a sophisticated, artistic, and influential civilization. They created beautiful art that still moves us today. They built cities with advanced engineering. They developed religious and political institutions that shaped Rome and, through Rome, all of Western civilization. They lived with a joy and vitality that shines through in their tomb paintings, their love of music and dance, their banquets and celebrations. They treated their women with a respect unusual in the ancient world. And they faced death not with fear, but with the conviction that life, in some form, would continue. The legacy of the Etruscans is all around us, even if we do not always recognize it. Every time we see a Roman arch or a dome, we are seeing Etruscan engineering principles. Every time we encounter a Roman religious practice or political symbol, we are seeing Etruscan influence. The very alphabet you are reading now has come down to us through Latin, which was written in a script derived from Etruscan, which in turn was derived from Greek. The Etruscans were a bridge between the Greek world and the Roman world, between the older civilizations of the Mediterranean and the new power that would dominate Europe for centuries. Perhaps the greatest mystery of the Etruscans is not where they came from, or what their language means, but why they were so thoroughly forgotten. How did a civilization that was so powerful, so influential, and so accomplished vanish so completely from memory? The answer lies partly in the nature of Roman historical writing. The Romans conquered the Etruscans, and in doing so, they absorbed Etruscan culture. But they also came to see the Etruscans as symbols of a past they had outgrown, a phase of their history that was primitive and foreign. Roman historians acknowledged that they had learned much from the Etruscans, but they also portrayed them as decadent, superstitious, and effeminate, particularly because of the freedom granted to Etruscan women. This ambivalence meant that while the Romans preserved some Etruscan traditions, they made little effort to preserve Etruscan texts, history, or language. When the Etruscan language died, an entire world of literature, philosophy, and religious thought died with it. But the Etruscans also contributed to their own disappearance. Because they never unified into a single state, they had no central archive, no royal library, no single repository of knowledge that might have survived. Each city kept its own records, and when those cities fell to Rome, those records were lost or destroyed. And so the Etruscans faded into legend, becoming a mysterious people of the distant past, known only through fragments and ruins. But in those fragments and ruins, we can still glimpse their world. We can still see the leopards on the tomb walls, still imagine the music and laughter of their banquets, still admire the skill of their craftsmen and the beauty of their art. The Etruscans remind us that history is not just about the civilizations that conquered and endured. It is also about those that flourished briefly, contributed greatly, and then vanished, leaving behind only questions and the faint echo of voices we can no longer fully understand. They remind us that the past is full of mysteries, that there are entire worlds that have been lost, and that beneath the familiar narrative of Western civilization, there are deeper, older, stranger stories waiting to be discovered. The secrets of the Etruscans are not fully revealed, and perhaps they never will be. But that is part of their enduring fascination. They remain tantalizingly just out of reach, a civilization we can see but never quite touch, a language we can read but never quite understand, a people who shaped our world and then disappeared into the shadows of time. And so our journey through the world of the Etruscans comes to a close. We have walked through their cities, descended into their painted tombs, and glimpsed their mysterious and beautiful civilization. It has been a true pleasure to be your guide through this enigmatic chapter of history. Thank you for listening. Until our next journey into the past, I wish you a calm and peaceful night.